Okay, and I've restarted the recording. So this is our wrap-up session on Monday, June 27th, 2022, the virtual residency workshop. I think we've been very fortunate. Let me turn my video on here. There we go. I think we've been very fortunate today. We've had some great sessions. This has been a really great start to our workshop, and I want to thank everybody. I've just been thrilled to no end to see the amount of discussion that's gone on in the chat and by voice during the question periods. I'm absolutely thrilled to pieces. Sagnik, do you have a question or just a leftover hands up? Okay. So let's kind of quickly recap what it is that we saw today. So I think we started out just taking a look at what the virtual residency is, how we got here, no problem, and what we're hoping to get out of this workshop and this week. So one of the questions that I saw come up in the chat was how to share this information with colleagues. I think probably typically at your own institution, but perhaps at other institutions as well. During this week, we will take new registrations all the way up until the end of the last session. So if you're itching, if somebody's itching to join in even late, they are welcome to do so. I think it's fair to say that almost none of our sessions have any prerequisites at all. I think it's valuable to be familiar with the early sessions, like today's sessions, as you go through the week, but it's not a formal prerequisite. There is, for the intake interviews, we do have a session that's sort of preparatory and then a session that's practical. And so it's probably wiser to participate in both of those if possible. But even there, it's not a requirement. And historically, people have done fine either way. So I want to encourage you to encourage your colleagues to participate. They are welcome to join us at any time. Well, okay, I have to say during the last session, since I'll be moderating the last session on Friday, probably pointless for them to register during that session because I won't notice and I won't be able to add them in. But the rest of it, just have them register, point them at the web page, which has got a link to the registration on it. Have them register so that we can track that and report it to the NSF so that we can get future funding. We will be delighted to have them at any point during the week. So coming up tomorrow, I know everybody is very excited. So let's take a look at what we've got. First thing in the morning, Jacob Fasotande is going to be doing the cyber infrastructure landscape, systems, service providers, and technologies. Then mid-morning, Dirk Colbury is going to be teaching how to do an intake interview, and that will include intake interview demonstrations. And the purpose of this session is to get you ready for the Wednesday intake interview session, which will be a practicum where we'll give a little bit of introduction, and then we will throw you in with real researchers. We've got about 20 real researchers lined up, and this will be your opportunity to practice intake interviews with real researchers. We'll do what we jokingly call speed dating, where a session with a real researcher will be about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll rotate the researchers among the breakout rooms, and everybody will get multiple chances to practice. We don't really have control over who's in which breakout rooms. That's sort of done at random by Zoom, but typically what happens is there's a mix of experienced facilitators and novice facilitators. And so this is an opportunity to learn from people who've already been doing it. It's a really great way to get your feet wet, or to reinforce, if you've been doing it for a while, to reinforce those skills of doing intake interviews, because sitting with a new researcher who you've never talked to before and learning what their needs are is a very, very valuable skill. And being able to do that efficiently and provide them something useful in the very first session is really crucial, because as I mentioned before, their tolerance for how long it takes to be productive is very, very low. Then in the early afternoon, we've got components and design of an HPC cluster. Jerry Perez is going to be leading that session. And then in the later part of the afternoon, Wallace Chase will be running research networking overview. So that'll be a great opportunity for you to learn not just about the specifics of the compute technology, but also how people are able to connect to that compute technology and move data to and from the compute technology, because without that data movement, the machines for many people are not that useful. So we're really looking forward to that session tomorrow. And I think at this point, what I want to do is I want to go back. I'm going to turn on share screen here. I want to go back to the page that's got the questions from effective communication and do a quick run through on that. And see where we ended up. So on effective communication, disciplines where gravity does and doesn't matter. So where gravity does matter, engineering, design research, wet chemistry, solid reagents are typically weighed. So implicitly, gravity matters. Jet propulsion, automotive engineering, civil engineering, length scales of objects whose motion or stability is affected by gravity. Math, that's an interesting one. I'd like to hear where gravity plays a role. There certainly is math around gravity. I'd like to hear where gravity plays a role in mathematics as a discipline. English and literature, ethics and philosophy, I'd love to hear if the people who have added these in want to talk about these. I'd love to hear how those fit together, because for me, this is new information and I'd love to hear more about that. Design, art, and I think this is also especially true for architecture, gravity would be really, really important. Astronomy, that one I'm familiar with because of who raised me as a grad student. Geology, that one's pretty straightforward. Genomics, this is news for me. Does anybody want to expand on genomics and the role of gravity in genomics?
This one is from Josie. In our institute, we have bioinformatics that study the DNA for the endangered species. It's not necessarily tied to the gravity, but I think in the bioinformatics, that's an emerging field and something we can tie to leverage the supercomputer capabilities to do the data mining.
Sure, I absolutely agree on that. All right. Does anybody want to comment about the non-STEM disciplines and where gravity fits into that? I understand things like design, art design, and architecture. I certainly get where gravity plays a role there. I'd love to hear more about where it plays a role in literature. And I see there's a chat here. Movie titles. Yeah, like the movie Gravity. I think that may be cheating. All right, well, and then for disciplines where gravity doesn't matter, general clinical research, theoretical chemistry, you're looking more at the rules of the author. Mary, do you want to expand on that a little bit? That's a bit unfamiliar to me.
Yeah, I'm not the one who wrote that in the documents, but I'm thinking of Star Wars as an example. So in Star Wars, whether specifically a movie at the moment, but there are books. In Star Wars, there's sound in space when you're watching a movie. And so I'm thinking as the author rules, as in saying that as they're describing a plot, that either they're assuming that there's gravity or they're creating kind of the rules that their books will fall within. So that's kind of how I see it. That's how I think about it as you were mentioning the literature in terms of the use of gravity.
I think that,
here we go. Ethics and philosophy too.
Right. I think that makes a lot of sense. Annalie, I see your comment. Gravity and ethics and philosophy or literature in the meaning of seriousness or graveness of approaches, actions, plots, etc. I think that's an excellent point. And it's good that you raised that, because I hadn't been thinking about that definition of the word gravity at all. I was thinking about that entirely in the sense of a physical force. But it actually reinforces the point that I had made earlier in the discussion about how easy it is to talk past someone if you use a particular jargon term in a way different from how they use it. So I think that actually helps a lot, because of reinforcing the larger point. Okay, so with disciplines where gravity does not matter, theoretical chemistry. So I gather the force of gravity is too weak to really be a driver of much of what's going on, and it's more like the nuclear forces that are and electro. I guess it's electro weak force. Again, not a physics person, so that are driving the phenomena at that scale. Micro nanoscience timescales are far too large compared to other forces. Yeah, that's exactly the sort of thing I'm thinking of, that with very small length and time scales, gravity tends to be less important in most cases. But with very large length and time scales, gravity tends to have much more of a measurable and important effect. And some of these other forces then sort of become less important. Social determinants of health research. Translation. So now there is a word that is beautifully ambiguous. Can you, whoever it was who offered that, or if anyone else wants to jump in, when you say translation, are you referring to translation linguistically from one language to another? Or are you thinking of translation, for example, in the sense of taking something from one context and moving it into another context? So, for example, translational research.
So yeah, so I wrote that in. I meant it literally in the linguistic sense, but even then, it depends, because you could actually end up translating a physics text, right?
Sure.
So even there, gravity could play a role.
Right.
But
Although,
but
correct me if
I
I'm
do
wrong, but
agree
I
with the
think
ambiguity of the term.
gravity would be the topic, and therefore would affect how you translated something, but gravity would not be affecting the process of translation, only the content. Is that true?
Yeah, specifically the knowledge that the translator should have about the subject matter that they're
Sure.
translating, right? Because if the
Absolutely.
translator has no idea about about physics, if they're translating a physics text, then maybe
Right.
they shouldn't be doing that.
Right. Yeah. Mathematics, I tend to agree. I think there is mathematics that concerns gravity, and their gravity plays a role, but that's because the mathematics is built around that set of phenomena. I think mathematics in the more general sense is not dependent on gravity, so I agree with how that was categorized. I tend to think of psychology as the same, though I suppose there are elements of psychology, particularly phobias, height-related phobias, for example, where gravity would play a significant role. But if you look at psychology overall, my guess is that the fraction of cases where gravity is important to the psychological aspects is probably modest. Effects of free fall on the psyche, right? Things of that nature. Psychology, sorry, we did psychology. Radio propagation, right? So again, electroweak forces, I think I'm getting that right, as opposed to gravitational forces, where the electroweak forces are more interesting and important at smaller time and length scales. Literature used in a comical or satirical context. Well, and if you think about it, film and stage comedy, where gravity is used as a mechanism for getting laughs, right? Someone slips on a banana peel. That's not one that would occur to me in the context of research, but it's absolutely correct to say that gravity is incredibly important in certain of those cases. A lot of slapstick humor is built around things like falling over. In fact, the term pratfall means to fall on your behind, right? So that's a gravity-driven thing. Okay, disciplines where data means something different than the traditional definition. Scientific data from Star Trek, right? Although that's a proper noun, a name. In principle, a person could be named for, you know, any noun, verb, adjective, whatever. And at one point, at least in the US, that was common practice. I think that's much less common now. Genomics, a collection of numeric symbolic letters and shapes that represent a particular known or unknown original code of a physical trait. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting definition. Archaeology, data is features and measurements within a site. Health outcomes, qualitative analysis and mixed methods research. Arts, literature, the data in literature is often the texts. Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And then the terminology, glossary, and we really don't have time to work our way through all of that, but I think it's valuable to take a look and see. There was a lot of terminology that's been added here that I think is, a lot of this was very opaque to me until y'all started writing this down. And I would go even farther and say the fact that all of these terms are being brought up and we're talking about their definitions within various contexts is actually really exciting in the following sense. It suggests that because so much of this is new to me, I imagine it is for everybody, that, you know, there's some stuff that's familiar, but a lot of stuff that's new. My guess is that there is a very rich vein to be mined here about differences in usage of vocabulary across different disciplines. But I think even just taking what's depicted here that we already have, there's actually a lot of important sort of zoom out information about how incredibly rich the collection of ambiguous terminology is. And that should both terrify and delight us. Terrify in the sense that it makes it challenging to do the job. Delightful in the sense that it makes us very useful to others. Okay, and I want to take a look also real quick at the responses to Bruce's final exam, because and again, I don't think we have time to dig into all of the details, but you can see there's a lot of richness in the responses that people provided about who to watch out for and who to help. And, you know, my own opinion was the answer is everybody in both cases, because if somebody is unhappy, then they can always go and tell all their colleagues. And that's going to carry over into your interactions with the people who, if not for that, would not have had an expectation that things would be disappointing or what have you. So I'm really excited to see the richness of these responses. I think this is really excellent. Okay, so I want to wrap up because we're just about at the end of our time. But I want to thank everybody for working together today on all of this information and helping us help each other. And I want to give you the bad news too. And I want to be real upfront about it. In 1 week, we cannot teach you what you need to know. In 1 week, we can teach you how to learn what you need to know. Then we all have to be working on this all the time. It never lets up. But the great part is what we learn is very exciting, interesting stuff. And we add a lot of value to researchers' productivity and the satisfaction associated with their research outcomes. So I want to thank everybody. I want to thank our speakers, Bruce Mason and Dylan Perkins. I want to thank our speakers for the rest of the week in advance, because I know we're going to have a fantastic time. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Come back tomorrow. If you had a good time today, you can have a good time again by coming back tomorrow. We'll look forward to seeing all y'all and others as well. Thank you so much for a wonderful day. Really appreciate what everybody has contributed. Bye-bye, everybody.